Good morning, you're watching Businessworld Live. I'm Danie Laurel. It's the last trading day of the month of May. Let's go straight to our top story. Analysts have noted that food prices stabilized in the past few weeks, and they believe this is the key reason for the May inflation figure. A Businessworld poll of 17 analysts yielded a median estimate of 4.5% CPI. Now, if realized, this would mark the third straight month of steady inflation. However, this is still higher than the Bangko Central's annual target of 2 to 4% inflation and is quicker than the 2.1% print recorded in May of 2020. Inflation data will be released on June 4th, while the Bangko Central will issue its inflation forecast range for May, that is later today. Analysts noted that food prices have generally stabilized, but pork prices have not eased. Meanwhile, HSBC Global Research said lockdown restrictions resulted in reduced demand-side pressures. Metro Manila and nearby provinces are under GCQ with heightened restrictions until today. The IATF has yet to announce new restriction protocols for the month of June. Analysts also point to high fuel prices, saying this will continue to be a point of concern. Most analysts believe the Bangko Central will continue to implement an accommodative stance to support the recession-hit economy. The economy shrank by 4.2% in the first quarter. And given the current situation in the country, IHS Markit is not so optimistic with its prospects. IHS says economic recovery is likely to be less buoyant than previously expected due to a sharp rise in the new cases and the pace of the vaccine rollout. Now, speaking of the vaccine rollout, let's take quick stock of where we are at the virus and vaccine front. Now, if we go offshore, the U.S. has some good news for us. They have reported the lowest level of infection since the early days of the pandemic. They even welcome back sports fans to stadiums. Japan, meanwhile, still going forward with the Tokyo Olympics, but they are considering requiring spectators there to either be tested or vaccinated. That's according to the Yomiuri newspaper. But there are renewed outbreaks over in Africa and also in Asia. Malaysia, for instance, announced a 2-week nationwide lockdown. China ordered a neighborhood in the city of Guangzhou to stay at home. So where are we right now? 170 million COVID-19 cases worldwide, with deaths surpassing 3.5 million. On the upside, more than 1.86 billion vaccine doses have been given worldwide, and some have just arrived here in the Philippines. It's 50,000 Sputnik vaccines having arrived in NAIA yesterday. That adds to the 15,000 doses which were already delivered by the Gamaleya Institute on May 1st. Now, there have been logistical issues, and these have been addressed. This is according to the Philippine ambassador to Russia, Carlos Soreta. They are hoping to send larger batches soon. Now, recall that Secretary Carlito Galvez announced earlier that the Philippines had secured 10 million vaccines of Sputnik 5 with a contract that could take it up to 20 million doses. Still, as mentioned earlier in the banner, the Philippines is simply 9th in Southeast Asia when it comes to the vaccine rollout vis-a-vis the population. So this, according to Galvez, we've already breached the 5 million mark, but of course that still does not mean that we've fully vaccinated 5 million people. Those are just doses. That is 4.6% of the population. This is as of Saturday. The NTF against COVID said about 1.18 million Filipinos have already received their second dose of the vaccine. Now, when it comes to frontliners who have received the first dose, that's 93% of the frontliners in healthcare, and out of 9 million senior citizens, 1.36 million pa lang ang nava-vaccine. Now, 22.7% of those with comorbidities have received at least one dose. So when it comes to A1 to A3, still not complete there, and Galvez has not disclosed the current daily vaccination rate. Meanwhile, even if those first three categories are not yet completed, we will be starting a 4 in June. That's tomorrow, and that includes government employees, food and pharma industry workers, palengke vendors, and even the media. But there is no announcement yet on which vaccines this group will be receiving. Now, let's open the markets here. 4 minutes into trade. Our index still in positive territory, up by 0.11% to 66.81. So, of course, this follows quite a rally last week, and analysts are saying that we may actually sustain this rally. Two Trade Asia says we could eventually hit 7,300. Now, recall that last week it already surged. You can see that uphill trend by 7.67%, and value turnovers were at 11.6 billion on average per day. This week, what's there to watch? Mondelez into offering and inflation on June. Now, I just want to take a quick peek at the banks. These are the sectors to be watching out for today. This, as Businessworld's quarterly banking report for the first quarter, has shown that the loans, all the loans of the aggregate loans of 46 of the biggest banks, declined by close to 6% year on year to 9.35 trillion pesos. This is the sharpest decline since the first quarter of 2003, and it brings our losing streak in loans to 3 consecutive quarters. Another bad thing here is bad loans that rose by 17.2% year on year to 362 billion pesos. That is now 4.12% of the loan portfolio in the first quarter. That's a new record. Meanwhile, BSP trying to address that, setting the IRR, or the implementing rules and regulations for the sale of the bad assets, bad loans, and the assets under the FIS law. So they did mention earlier on that they expect the FIS law to help the lenders dispose of around 152 billion pesos in these non-performing assets. The IRR has now been put into effect. Now, another thing to be watching out for in the banks is the transition to sustainable banking. So the BSP has said that the banks have 3 years to integrate these sustainability principles into their operations. Recall that in last year, the banks were already told to disclose the climate change risks. Now, here to chat with us about his outlook on this last trading day of May, we have with us Royce Aguilar of First Metro Securities. Good morning, Royce, and welcome to the broadcast. Okay, I think we're losing Royce. We'll just try to get back with him later on. But I did want to take a quick peek at the movers here. Let's take a look at which ones are pulling the index still up and keeping us buoyant. You can see First Gen up by 3.5%, followed by Globe and the San Miguel Corporation here. And our losers, AEV, down by 2%, Pure Gold as well. Okay, we've got Royce here back with us. Hi, Royce from First Metro Securities.
Hello everyone. Hello.
Bryce, what caused this rally, and was that expected at all? It seems that there wasn't necessarily one major catalyst. Some are saying the MSCI rebalancing. Some are saying, the possibility that restrictions will be lifted come June 1. Some are just saying it's window dressing at the end of May. What's the real story here, and does this rally have legs?
Actually, it's a combination of two things. But the main thing was related to the MSCI rebalancing. Honestly, we were expecting the rally to begin last Friday, but it began way earlier because you have two funds, right? You have two funds. You have active and you have passive funds. The active funds, what they did was they already sold ahead of the expected selling pressure for the MSCI rebalancing. So what they did was they bought the expected selling pressure from the passive funds. Nevertheless, it's more on bargain hunting because they believe um, restrictions will be eased further, and then the market is cheaper than its peers. So there, it's more on bargain hunting. So we do expect, in terms of sustainability, we expect this to be sustainable. But it's hinged on the vaccine rollout and the like. But in terms of valuations, there's really legs, mainly because of valuations alone. So there's really room for upside.
Did you see that the rally was limited to those MSCI companies, and those are really what lifted the bourse, or was this contagion in terms of there was optimism broad based?
Well, in terms of who outperformed, it was related to the MSCI rebalancing, right? But in terms of whether is it just MSCI or not, well, that will we will see that in the next trading sessions because that will determine whether they are really positive in terms of the vaccine rollout, in terms of the restrictions and the like. I think it will be announced today whether restrictions will be eased further or not. Nevertheless, that will determine the sustainability of the rally moving forward. But definitely, it's a welcome development what happened last week, and it was complemented by volume, so that is a good signal.
Okay, let's talk about which you find are still bargains right now. You mentioned that there's bargain hunting. Which sectors in particular are those completely the ones hard hit by COVID, or were these still the star sectors of the pandemic?
Actually, it was mostly the reopening winners are not yet outperforming as we'd like to. So it's really a combination of select holding companies, property and banking. So those were the underperformers here to date. So we actually saw, for example, FGen is outperforming. That's why it underperformed last week.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why you're seeing here the shift of investors towards the underperformers, which are actually your reopening winners, have which in terms of on oh, oh, which in terms of performance or outperformance in the next 1 to 2 years, that's your bet, the reopening winners.
You mentioned that, of course, a lot, and everyone says this time and time again, is hinged on the vaccine rollout. But what exactly do you mean by this? What numbers are you looking at as, an investor, a trader, to say that the vaccine rollout is now, underway in a good way, and we've improved dramatically?
It's actually two things. It's actually two things. Number one, the uptrend in daily COVID, daily vaccinations. Right? That's the short term catalyst. And then in the terms of long term catalyst, to source what I've read in terms of health experts, I believe they're saying 60-70%. But I would like to be realistic first, 60-70%, at least in the NCR, where most economic activities are. So those are your catalysts in terms, or numbers, so to speak, that we are watching in terms of vaccine rollout.
What do you think about rumors of a herd immunity bull run? Is this something that has happened in other markets as well? And is this something that might already be underway right now, or are we not there yet?
Well, for us, there's still upside because, for example, if you take a look at the US, right, the Dow Jones, S&P are outperforming the Nasdaq. The Nasdaq is your relatively defensive, um, COVID-19 bets, right? But now the Dow Jones and S&P 500 are outperforming because that's where your reopening winners are: the airlines, the banks, and the like, the tourism companies. So it's already underway in other countries. For us, it's just beginning. So there's still upside ahead, specifically here in the Philippines.
Okay, and finally, let's just talk about one stock in particular that I wanted to take up with you, and that is MPIC. They have just announced that they're cutting their 2021 capex. This after they had already announced it was 25 billion pesos. Now it's quite a significant cut to 14 billion pesos. But they say that this might actually bode well for them, allowing them to refinance. Is this something that might affect their growth prospects in the long term? Or is this something that investors are welcoming?
Well, I think we have to analyze this further, right? I think what they're trying to do is they're being specific in terms of the projects that they're trying to pursue. Nevertheless, I think in the short term, I would like to mention that their progress on their water concession is definitely a welcome development. I think that's where investors will focus more, at least in the short term, in terms of the progress on the regulation side. Um, First of all, MPI is significantly cheap already. We mentioned that the market is cheap, but MPI is cheaper, right,
Mm-hmm.
compared to peers. That being said, I think there's upside specifically for MPI. It's just a matter of the catalyst, and one catalyst, which is the regulation side, is already showing signs of progress. So Maynila is already signed a concession agreement with the government. So that's a welcome development that investors should take a look at further. So
Okay, so not to worrying for you here in terms of the capex cut, especially if it will bode well for the short term. Thank you so much for those insights. MPIC trading at 3 pesos and 95 centavos. That was, of course, Royce Aguilar of First Metro Securities. Thanks, Royce.
thank you.
Here are the other headlines we're keeping our eyes on. Gross borrowings jumped 3.5% in April to the tune of 272 billion pesos. Domestic debt accounted for 39% of that total, while the rest were from foreign creditors. New debts obtained in the local market jumped more than 38%, while external borrowing surged 83%, mainly due to the combined 146 billion pesos in issuances of euro-denominated and samurai bonds. Now, year to date, the national government's gross borrowings rose 35.6% from a year ago after the state returned to the global debt market twice last month. Recall that the government is looking to raise 3 trillion pesos this year to help plug its budget deficit, which is seen to hit 8.9% of the gross domestic product. Business groups are calling for the urgent passing of pending economic bills before the Congress adjourns this week. The lower house has initially committed to fast-tracking the approval of the Bayanihan 3 bill and the Economic Charter Change Resolution before June 4th, but both the British and American Chambers of Commerce and other business groups want the lawmakers to approve all key economic measures this week. These include the proposals to amend the Public Service Act, the Foreign Investments Act, and the Retail Trade Liberalization Act of 2020. These three bills are seen as tools to aid recovery from the effects of the pandemic by attracting investments and jobs. The House versions of the proposals have been approved on third reading. On the other hand, the Senate has approved the Retail Trade Liberalization Bill, while the rest are still pending deliberations. And the Agriculture Department expects the World Bank to approve an additional $280 million second additional financing. That's on June 17th. This would be equivalent to 14 billion pesos to fund more agriculture enterprise and rural infrastructure projects that's under the Rural Development Project. This new funding is the second tranche of the $450 million total funding from the World Bank as approved by the Investment Coordination Committee in 2016. Agriculture Secretary William Dar says that the amount includes a co-financing grant from the European Union, which is worth 18.3 million euros. The PRDP has since rolled out 1,091 projects across 78 provinces, which has benefited over 766,000 households as of April 30th. And that's a first look into the business day. Today is Monday, May 31, 2021. Catch Business World Live for the market close. That's at 3:15 p.m. today. I'm Danie Laurel. Mask on, wash hands, stay safe. Philippines, your One News.